Shut up while I'm talking.
No. Trying to have me to turn on Trump because Trump insulted him in some way, and their feelings are hurt. And that's how you sound to me right now, Daniel. I mean, I don't mean to characterize it in this way in a political sense, but it's genuinely, I don't find it much different. I find it to be a disgusting and sickening mentality on your part.
You're a piece of shit.
But you can go on, Daniel.
Nonetheless, in all things considered, good.
But you can continue, Daniel. I'll still engage. I mean, get it all out if you want.
When you say it's a disgusting and sickening mentality, you think it's in all things considered good, though, right?
Yes, ultimately, when someone is judged and suffers for it, that is also a good thing, Jack.
Yeah, so it's for the best that he has this mentality.
Absolutely.
Yes, I don't really know why you're deploring it when you think it's in all things considered good. Seems like something to celebrate.
Yes. Now, when the Holocaust happens, let's say, well, it's also sickening. It's deplorable. And the point
Yeah, but
being,
by deplorable, you don't mean anything normative.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing about what we as Christians rejoice in is the hope, right? And so we believe in justice, and we rejoice in that justice, right? And so that day that we can celebrate, so to speak, is not that day when people suffered and died. No, the day of justice is when people are judged, when the wicked are judged, and that is a day that we. So when you say pro toto good, Jack, well, I'm looking toward the future, where you think I'm supposed to be celebrating the past. That's not correct.
Well, I'm just saying that when you say deplorable, you don't mean anything normative.
No, I do mean it in a normative sense.
Oh, so you mean it ought not to be?
No, how many
even
times?
Though it's in all things, even though it's in all things considered good, it ought not to be?
Yeah, like once again, Jack, I mean, you and I have had discussions on oughts and good and all of these things, action guiding norms. I mean, you have your understanding, and I have a little bit of a different understanding.
Well, I'm just trying to get clear on what your view is, right? So I'm understanding normative as relating to oughts, right? So when you say deplorable and you say that's normative, I take it that you mean it ought not to be.
Sure, why not? If
Right.
you want to say it that way.
Yeah, but then you think it's in all things considered good, and that's a normative notion too, right?
Sure.
Sure, so when something normatively is in all things considered good, that means it ought to be. So it sounds like you're saying it both ought to be and ought not to be. And that's a contradiction.
Oh, no, it's only a contradiction if it's in the same time in the same sense. But clearly that's not the case.
Wait, I meant ought to be and ought not to be in the same sense when I said normatively. You mean different senses?
Of course. I just explained it.
Oh, sorry. So I'm trying to understand. When I say ought to be and ought not to be, I'm talking in the same sense. What sense are you talking about?
I'm talking about the end result of pro toto good. Pro toto good, I think it's kind of like this. I explained it in a sense of you have a +1, you have a -2, and you have a +2. And so you have a +1 there, right? And so in the pro toto is +1, right? So when you look at the -2, it's pro toto good in a sense of +1. However, when all said and done and all calculated, however, when you look at the -2, one cannot say because the summation is a +1 that the -2 is also positive. No, we look at the -2 and recognize that it is a negative. But ultimately, it is instrumental in the +1.
Well, I'm just trying to understand in what sense it's negative if in fact it ought to be done.
Well, I'm not saying it ought to be done.
Yeah, you did.
It ought not to be done.
No, you said it. You said it's in all things considered good, and that's a normative notion, which means it ought to be done.
No, I look at it in terms of ought to occur, which is a little bit different.
Yeah, that distinction eludes me. You've never been able to explain, and I dare say eludes everyone else. Right? So yeah, I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to understand if you're saying it ought to occur, right, but it ought not be done.
Listen, I don't mind this conversation, Jack, but every time I do talk about something and I think of something as, let's say, evil, let's say, and for whatever reason you go, oh, wait, in your view, that's pro-toto good, and then we start this conversation again.
That's right.
So, I mean,
yeah, the reason why I started again is because basically what you do is when you start saying stuff is deplorable, what you're doing is lashing out. And what's interesting is that when you get challenged on how you're lashing out, right, you end up walking it back by saying, oh, well, when I say it's deplorable, in fact, I'm not saying that you ought not do it.
wait, I didn't say that either.
Yeah, well, what you say that in effect.
Deplorable things are things that ought not be done, right? But also you are correct when I'm not saying that he ought not do it. There's a difference there as well.
Yeah, he ought not do it, but it ought to be done.
No.
I'll
say it this way. It ought to occur, it ought not be done, and I'm not going to tell him he ought not do it. Those are the three statements.
You mean come to pass, right?
I don't really understand what it means to say that it ought to occur, although it ought not be done.
No, everything that occurs ought to occur.
Yeah,
There's nothing that occurs that ought not to occur.
Yeah, I didn't ask you that.
Well, you'd never hear me say ought not occur.
Yeah, I said, I didn't understand what it means to say that it ought to occur, although it ought not be done.
Yeah, in that sense, yeah.
What does that mean?
It ought to occur because it occurred. The only reason it did occur is because God
but I'm
permitted
asking what it
occur.
means.
Ought to occur? Well, that ought to occur is representative of the actions of God.
See, because
ought not be done represents the actions of the created
when
agent.
something is normative, right, I take it that it's somehow action guided. So if ought to occur doesn't mean something that's supposed to guide action, right, then I don't know what it means to say it's a normative notion.
Well, if you want to look at it as some action guiding, so these actions guide toward mercy or justice. Maybe it could be understood that way. So it's in the purview of the perspective of God as we look at it objectively. Now, when we look at it in terms of the actual perpetrator, sinner, agent, criminal, whatever, deplorable, like Daniel, then it is the case that it ought not to be done. Now, whether for me to tell Daniel it ought not to be done, then that he ought not to do it, that's yet a third statement that I would not make. So it's kind of like
Jack, where are you at right now?
Like a deli. So yeah, I'm trying to understand.
I've been trying to explain for weeks and months now.
Yeah, and nobody understands what you're saying, which is for me like strong evidence that you're engaging in bullshit. So yeah, so when I talk about oughts, I'm saying I'm understanding them as being some kind of a guide to action, which means should I do this or should I not do this, right? So if it's something that should be done, if I judge that it's something that it should be done, then if I'm rational, I do it, right? As long
That's
as
right.
nothing prevents
Clearly,
me from doing
clearly,
it.
Daniel would not be rational. That's what I'm saying.
So he thinks that it ought to be done, and he doesn't do it.
I think that's what's going on. I think he's doing it because he thinks it ought to be done.
But you're saying it ought not be done.
That's correct.
Yeah. So.
But
So I'm trying to understand.
But because of I believe in the freedom of the individual, kind of like what we're discussing with Mo. Because of that right, that prerogative, I don't tell Daniel that he ought not to do it. That would be for him to decide.
Yeah, but see, the problem is that when you say that it's action guiding for God, right?
Right.
You're saying the You're saying the opposite.
Well, we have to understand that God is not doing what Daniel's doing. So once we make that distinction that God is not doing what Daniel's doing, Daniel's doing what Daniel's doing, and Daniel ought not do what Daniel's doing, then you look at the occurrence. The reason Daniel is doing what he's doing is because it was permitted to occur, that because of God being sovereign. Now, God permitted it to occur, and thus it occurred. And not only did God permit it to occur, it was according to his creative will that the actions of Daniel come to pass. And so, in that case, it ought to occur. And not only so, that action guiding norm that you're talking about ought to occur, it is pointing toward a future and not the past act that already occurred.
Yes, I'm still trying to understand this. So God ought to permit, well, God ought to ordain that to happen, right?
If you want to look at, I mean, I really don't like to say that God ought to do anything, but I mean, just for like purposes of communication, you know, I'm just saying, I'm just using the language that way.
Well, the idea is that the reason why God ordains it to happen is because it ought to happen, right?
Yes, exactly.
Right. So because it ought to happen,
there are multiple but there are multiple reasons that God is given reason to allow it to happen. Now, there is to damn Daniel, to judge Daniel, to condemn him for his actions. But there's also for the reason to forgive Daniel, to bestow mercy upon Daniel. And so we don't know. Ultimately, God knows. But what we do know is whether this for action, for judgment, or whether for mercy, they're both good. And so they ought to occur. In other words, we just don't know for which purpose.
That's fine, but that's immaterial because you're just telling me what explains why it ought to happen.
Correct.
I'm accepting for the sake of argument that the reason why God does it is because it ought to happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, now, given that it's in all things considered good, which explains why God ordains it, what I'm trying to understand is how it is that you're not using a different notion of the good when you say that Daniel ought not do it.
It's just a different context. It's a different person. And so there are things Daniel ought and ought not do, right? And in this particular sense, there's no way, there's absolutely no way that we can, assuming that Daniel's doing wrong, right? Of course, that's the assumption here. If that's the case, then We don't call it good. Certainly not. Just
No,
because
but I don't think you're
there's a good.
understanding. I don't think you're understanding. So there's an event in question, right? Let's call that event X. Doesn't matter what it is,
Okay.
right? It's whatever Daniel is. Shall we say? Let's say X is good, and it's what Daniel is not doing. So Daniel does not X, right?
Okay.
So there's an event in question X, right? Now, because X is in all things considered good, it's action guiding for God, right, to bring X about.
Yeah, I don't consider X, all things considered, good. I consider X pro tanto good. There's a difference.
Oh, so there's something else that God should ordain?
No, because you're just saying, you just label it X, and so X is Daniel's action.
Isn't everything that God ordains all things considered good?
All things considered in this example would be Y, not X.
No. I was saying that Daniel ought to do X, but instead he does not X, right?
Okay, but what I'm saying is the X appears like you're saying that
let's actually use your language, because it's probably going to be more precise to say Daniel does Y, where we understand.
No. Y is that way. Y is never Daniel. Y is always God. X is Daniel, and Daniel can either do X, pro tanto good.
All right, so we'll reverse it. Okay, so Y
is always God, is what I'm trying to say.
Y is what God ordains, and Daniel ought to do X, but he ends up doing Y.
No. Y is never applicable to Daniel.
So I'm saying there's an event, right? So let's pick an event. What was it that you were saying that Daniel did that was deplorable?
Not X.
No, but what was it specifically? So we don't get lost in the algebra.
Okay, what was I saying? Let me, hang on. I'd have to think about this. Because I did make a series of statements, and then after I was finished, I said I find that deplorable.
Yeah, you were vehement about that. Surely you remember.
Trying to demonize Darth Dawkins, maybe. I'll just put it like that.
No, that is not what I was doing.
And that's what comes to mind, irrespective of whether you think that's what you're doing or not.
I was saying
that's what I'm saying is extra.
You're being a coward.
Yeah, but that's not that important. Danny.
You're being a coward.
For the purpose of discussion with Jack, that's what I'm characterizing as X.
You're being a coward by not mentioning Darth's name.
Yo, Daniel, we gotta review some debates, buddy.
Yeah, you're missing the point. But okay, did you get that, Jack? What X is?
No.
Yeah. Okay. So demonizing Darth Dawkins is something that Daniel ought not to do, but that somehow ought to occur, right?
Correct.
Daniel, or I should say, Daniel demonizing Darth Dawkins is something that you want to say ought to occur, but that Daniel ought not do.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. So here's the problem. The problem is there's an event in question, which is Daniel demonizing Darth Dawkins. That's the event in question.
Right. X. Or not X in this case.
Well, let's call it... Yeah, let's say X is demonizing Darth Dawkins. Hold on a second, let me just plug in my battery.
Okay.
There we go.
Because I thought that would be better if it was like X is something good, pro tanto good.
That's
And,
fine. All right.
yeah, and it would be
X,
not, yeah.
So demonizing Darth Dawkins is what God ordains. And because, so I'm sorry, Daniel demonizing Darth Dawkins is what God ordains. It's a specific event that happens at a specific time and place, right? So we'll call that event X.
No, hang on. God does not ordain X.
Yeah, he does.
No, he does not.
Well, by ordain, I mean causally determine that it happens.
Yeah, he does not. And that was a discussion I had with Floyd. God does not determine, God does not ordain X. God ordains Y. There's a difference.
What's Y?
Y is what God permits to occur.
The question is X, right? And I'm saying God causally determines that X happens.
No, that's so much of a common misconception. God does not, once again, God does not ordain X.
He doesn't causally determine that X happens?
No, Daniel chooses X.
No, I'm not denying that Daniel chooses X.
Right.
I'm not denying that he chooses it.
Yes, but also God does not determine X. Or God does not decree X. Or God does not causally determine X. That's the common misconception in all of this thought, is my point.
So I don't understand. So you're saying that God is not sovereign?
God is sovereign because
what happens?
Because God decrees Y.
I don't understand.
God decrees.
Y is what doesn't occur.
That it's come to pass.
No, sorry. X is what comes to pass.
No.
On this.
No.
Yeah, what comes to pass is that
X is what Daniel does.
No. X is the name of the event. Right? Daniel demonizing Darth Dawkins.
Okay.
Right? That's the event that occurs, and I'm saying God ordains all events that occur.
No. And so in that sense, it's God ordains Y. And so in other words, Y is the permission for X to occur. Does that make sense? So it's not the case that God ordains X, God ordains Y.
Do you understand what I mean by causally determine?
Because God ordains Y, right? Daniel, I would say, is causally determining the action, but
do you understand what I mean by causally determine?
But because God is sovereign, it is a case that he can prevent Daniel, but in this case he does not prevent Daniel, and so thus it occurs.
Do you understand what I mean by causally determine?
Yeah, when you say God ordains X, that's what causally determine means.
No, but do you understand what I mean when I'm saying ordain means causally determine, but do you understand what I mean by causally determine?
I would think like makes happen.
So the idea is going to be if X causally determines Y, it means given that X holds, it's entailed that Y will hold. So when we're talking about events or states of affairs, so it's going to be, there's going to be a necessity relation, and let's say that necessity relation holds in terms of some kind of natural laws. So the idea is going to be, given a set of laws and given a set of conditions, right? If you have a certain set of conditions and a certain set of laws, that entails that some specific event will happen, right? So you might say, given, let's assume there's no randomness, right? And let's say that let's say we know the laws of mechanics, right? Let's say they're broadly like Einsteinian, right? They're relativistic. So there are these laws of mechanics, right? So given certain conditions, right, and given those laws, it's going to mean that in every possible world where those conditions hold and those laws hold, right, you're going to get some specific outcome. So the idea is going to be something like this. You have, let's say, conditions A in which means just material facts, physical facts, something like that. So you have conditions A, and you have laws B, and then you have some outcomes C. So what I'm saying is the conjunction of A and B causally determines C if, given A and B, C is entailed.
Yeah, I
So
think I know.
that's to say wherever you have this set of conditions and you have this set of laws, it's not possible to have a different outcome. Not nomologically possible, right? Nomologically possible means possible with respect to a given set of laws, right?
Yeah, but here's what you're missing. When you had Daniel committed to X, right, or not X, however which way you want to understand it, and it is the case that if God does not, if Daniel does not X, then God permits it. But if it's the case that that Daniel is committed to not X, or God is being sovereign, he can easily prevent Daniel from doing not X. So in this case, what occurs if God intervenes, Daniel will not be successful in not X. And so the result of that would be God intervening. Well, it did not happen because God intervened. But if it did happen, God permitted it to happen. Therefore, it happened. But God did not cause it to happen. It was the case that Daniel caused it to happen, and that's why the permission of God permitting it would be why, and the why is always what happens. It's always pro toto good, and it's in God's purview to allow all of that, and so that's how I understand it.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, so you can think of it kind of like a set of dominoes, right? Given the dominoes are arranged in a certain way, and given a certain set of laws, right? If the dominoes behave in a law-like way at that world, right, and a certain set of laws hold, if you push over one domino, right, it's going to be entailed, which is to say, pushing over the first domino will causally determine the last domino falling.
So I have
right?
a question. Who's pushing over that domino?
Well, I'm saying God sets up the initial conditions,
Okay.
right?
And who pushes it over?
Which is to say, he pushes the first domino.
God does?
Right. So it sounds like all you're saying when you say he doesn't ordain it is that he's merely the proximate cause, not the distal cause. Right?
Well, this is how
of the last domino falling.
Let me put it this way. God sets up the dominoes, right? Not only so, he puts Daniel into the space that we're talking about. And Daniel is committed to pushing the domino. Now, Daniel ought not push the domino, but he's committed to
forget
doing
about
so.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
my point is this. Okay, if Daniel pushes the domino, he ought not push it, right? But God allows it in the sense that it's wise, right? Now, if Daniel wants to push the domino, now God, if you can imagine the hand just picking him up and pulling him out of that thing, the dominoes remain untouched. It would be the case that God has prevented Daniel from doing what he was committed to do. So in that case, the dominoes are not done, and God was the cause of that. However, if God permits Daniel to do it, Daniel himself is the cause of pushing that first domino, not God.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about that. When I say God pushes the first domino, right? He's initiating causally the set of causes, right, that entail that that Daniel will have that commitment at a later time, and will find himself in a circumstance where he acts on that commitment.
Yeah,
All
well,
those
once
things will be
again,
tailed.
once again, you have God pushing the domino. In my analogy, God is not even touching the dominoes.
But you think that God set up the initial. You think that God causally. You think that God
God set up the room. Yeah,
caused.
God set up the room. God even set up the dominoes. God even put Daniel into the room, but ultimately, it's Daniel causing the dominoes to fall by his own actions and his
No,
own
but
choice.
the first domino. What I'm saying is the first domino is the initial event. The initial event is prior to even Daniel existing, right? Initial event was like the creation of the world or something.
So I guess my question is, you cannot understand it in that way about the domino, and yes, did God cause Daniel's existence? Yes. Did God set up the dominoes? Even yes. Did He create the space for the dominoes to exist? Yes. Did He give Daniel the ability to knock over the dominoes? Yes. Did He give Daniel the will to knock over the dominoes? That actually would be no, right? And it would be something like that. Now, if it were the case that Daniel pushed over the dominoes, God allowed it, and if he was prevented from doing it, God, in His sovereignty, prevented that to happen. He was unwilling for that to happen.
Yeah, but what
That evil.
I'm asking is, do antecedent conditions explain why Daniel's causally explain why Daniel finds himself with that commitment and finds himself placed in the circumstance where he's motivated to act on that commitment?
Yeah, God is in control of all of that. That's what you're saying, I guess, right?
Well, I'm just saying that presumably there's prior conditions. Like you might think that so it's just going to be similar to the previous domino, right? If let's say Daniel is the last domino, right? Presumably some set of antecedent conditions, which are going to include the previous domino, right, explain why the last domino falls, right? It's because the domino before it falls that it falls, because the domino before it knocks it over.
Yeah,
So
no, I
because,
get.
yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah. So what I'm saying is, presumably Daniel's actions are like that, right? There are facts prior to himself in that situation, right, that explain causally why he finds himself in that situation and why he finds himself having the beliefs and desires that he has, right, which causally explain why he acts in the way that he does, right?
Right, and so in your analogy, Daniel is an agent. He is not a domino, right? And so God, if Daniel was an
I'm
agent
not
and God,
denying he's an agent.
right? And so God, it's not like Daniel's a domino and he's pushing Daniel as if he's a domino, and he starts off a
I'm
chain
saying
reaction.
no. I'm just understanding an agent whose desires explain their actions.
And so, as far as the whole scenario, like I said, God is in control of everything, even Daniel.
Wait, but do we agree? Do we agree that what it means to say that he's an agent is that his beliefs and desires causally explain his actions, right?
Yes, exactly. But God is
Okay,
not the cause
right.
of that.
So what I'm
God
saying
is
is,
not the cause of that.
well, wait a minute. So what I'm saying is that if the desires explain the actions, right, something explains the beliefs and desires, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm just saying that those are what I'm calling antecedent conditions.
Okay.
Yeah,
But it's
and
not
so those
God.
antecedent.
But it's not God.
Well, wait a minute. But those antecedent conditions also have a prior cause that explain them, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So when you get all the way back, you get to the first domino, and that's the one that God pushes over.
No, that would go, and then that the thing that caused Daniel to have this will and commitment and desire. There is an antecedent. You are correct, right? But it's not a domino, right? It's his progenitor in a sense, right? And so it goes back in human way all the way back to Adam and Eve, and that's where it begins.
Yeah, but prior even to Adam and Eve, there are things that explain.
That's what I'm
there
saying.
are things that explain. God explains God creates Adam and Eve with certain beliefs and desires, which explain their actions, right?
Well, he didn't create them with the desire to sin. He doesn't tempt them, in other words.
Well, I'm not talking. I'm talking
Neither
about
did he
them
create
now.
them with sinful nature.
I'm not talking about them sinning right now. I'm just saying that as soon as Adam and Eve appeared, they had beliefs and desires, which God gave them.
That's
right?
correct.
Yeah, and those beliefs and desires explain their subsequent actions, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what I mean by saying God pushes over the first domino, because he's the one who creates Adam and Eve to have certain beliefs and desires, which explain everything that happens, causally explain everything that happens in subsequent human history, right?
So maybe it's best understood this way: God created them with the ability to not only be tempted, but to act upon that temptation. Maybe
Okay.
Would that be a fair understanding?
Probably. I could go with that for now. So my point is that when I say God causally determines Daniel's action, I'm just saying that God pushed over the first domino, and Daniel's action is the last domino falling.
Yeah, I just wouldn't really characterize it as pushing. Like I don't consider like Daniel a sort of a domino that gets pushed, or even his.
Yeah, but I'm not denying that Daniel, right? An agent means, what I'm understanding an agent to be is somebody whose beliefs and desires explain their actions.
Exactly.
I'm just saying that Daniel's beliefs and desires are explained by prior states of affairs, temporally prior states of affairs.
And I agree with
and
that.
Those states of affairs, right? And those states of affairs are explained by temporally prior to states of affairs that are temporally prior to that.
Right, but there's a regress. But there's a
the regress ends. Yeah, and the beginning is God, because God.
You're not allowing
God makes the creative decision, right, to create the world, create Adam and Eve. And so he creates Adam and Eve with certain beliefs and desires and places them in a certain set of circumstances with those beliefs and desires, such that, given that they have those beliefs and desires and find themselves in that time and place, necessarily, right? Necessarily, they will. Necessarily, everything that happens subsequent to that must happen the way that it does.
No.
But I would say there is a regress, but that regress is not infinite back to God. It is temporal.
It's not
like
infinite.
Well,
it's not infinite.
But the point being that as we as Christians understand, it stops right at Adam and it doesn't go before that.
That's fine. It doesn't matter. The point is, God is the person who sets the chain of dominoes in motion. He pushes over the first domino.
Dude, they're not dominoes. Free agents are co-creators.
Exactly.
You have a libertarian view. John is a compatibilist.
Oh, but what I'm trying to avoid is a human being being a domino in this example.
Yeah, but the point is, I'm saying that this is entailed by a compatibilist view. So what Paul is saying is just immaterial.
You're just saying he has a different view, right?
Yeah, he's not defending your view. He's objecting that I'm describing a determinist scenario, right? And if libertarian free will holds, then determinism is false, right? But your view is a compatibilist one, and so he's just objecting to your view.
Right, he's just objecting to compatibilist view. That's what
that's right. Yeah. I mean, his view isn't going to work either. We could talk about why his is going to fail independently. But just for the meantime, to talk about your view, what I'm saying is that God pushes over the first domino. He sets in motion the initial state of affairs that causally necessitates all subsequent states of affairs. And I'm not denying agency, because I'm granting you that compatibilism is true, right? Which just means that every agent, when they acts on their beliefs and desires. Their beliefs and desires explain what they do, at least when they're making choices, anyway.
Well,
right?
I mean, the bottom line is if you're trying to say that God is sovereign, well, I can certainly sign off on that, if that's what you're saying.
So when I say
ultimately,
God causally, so when I say God ordains, right, that Daniel...
I was fucking busy today.
What was the
my shit was
example? Defames Darth Dawkins? Was that what it was?
Yeah.
So when I say when I say God ordains that Daniel defamed Darth Dawkins, I just mean that he causally determines that. And what I mean by saying he causally determines that is he sets up the dominoes and pushes over the first one. And what I mean by that is that he creates the initial set of conditions that causally entail all future outcomes. And when I say he sets that up, I mean that he causes that to come into being. So you agree with all of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I know where the issue is. It's basically that's what Floyd was arguing. And so when you have this understanding that God ordains X, and that's just the fundamental difference, is that the way you visualize it is God, because obviously everything begins with God, right? And he created the world, he created human beings, all of this. And we are here right now where we are today, and things the way they are there for a reason. And so it's like because of that, you think that God ordains X, and us having free will, compatible with free will.
As I'm using the word ordain, he does, right? So you might not use that language. You might use the word ordain to mean something else.
Just permit.
I'm using the word ordain.
Permissive will.
Yeah, what I mean what I mean by ordain is causally determine, right? And I've explained how it is that God, on your view, must causally determine all future outcomes by setting up the initial conditions, which is to say by causing the initial set of conditions to come into being, right, including the laws that are going to hold at that world, right, with full foreknowledge of what is going to happen, right? He causes all future states of affairs to come into being given that initial set of conditions. That, which is to say, given that initial set of conditions which God causes to come into being, it's nomologically necessitated every future outcome from the initial moment in time, right, in earthly time.
Okay, so I have a question
time. Every future event, right, is nomologically necessitated by the initial event. That's all that I'm saying.
So let me ask you this question. So God causes Agent A to exist. Agent A acts in a way that maybe he ought not. Let's just say that, right? So if Agent A acts in a way that he does something he ought not, the question is God, who created Agent A, with the ability to choose to do action X, what he not do, is he causally, what did you say again?
Causally determining.
Is he causally determining that action?
Yes.
Okay. In that case, yeah, I could sign off on that.
Yeah, okay. So that takes, so now we've gotten to the point where we agree that God ordains, which is to say causally determines, that Daniel performs some action.
I would prefer you use the word causally determined rather than ordained.
Okay.
Just okay.
So God causally determines that that some event occur, which is that Daniel defame Darth Dawkins. God causally determines that. That some event occur. That event is an action, which is to say it's something that an agent sort of voluntarily does, right? So it's an action. An agent voluntarily does it. That's Daniel, right? God causally determines that Daniel defamed Darth Dawkins. Now, what I understand you to be saying is that everything that God causally determines is in all things considered good, right? Yeah. So therefore, therefore Daniel performing that action, that event, Daniel performing that action, which is to say Daniel defaming Darth Dawkins, is, on your view, in all things considered good, because God causally determines that to happen. Right?
All things considered, yes.
Yeah, it's in all things considered good, right? Now, see, what I'm saying is that if you're not a relativist about the good, if you think there's just one objective standard of what the good is, right, which is given by what God desires or God's nature, whatever, right, then it can't be the case that Daniel ought not defame Darth Dawkins, where ought not, right, is understood to be guided by norms of what is good and evil, right? Because given that there's only one standard of the good, right, it follows that if God causally determines it to happen, and it's in all things considered good, then the very same event which is action guiding for, right, which is considered good for, or guides his action to causally determine it, right, the very same event must be in all things considered good for him. Otherwise, you're just a relativist. Otherwise, you're just a moral relativist. And you're saying there's a different standard of the good for Daniel than there is for God. Because we're describing the very same event, right? The very same event, which Daniel defaming Darth Dawkins. Ought God bring about that event causally? Ought Daniel bring about that event causally? Right? So if it's an all things considered good for God for that event to be brought about, and therefore that he causally determines it, then Daniel, when he's considering, right, what ought to be done, right, whether or not he knows, right, what ought to be done, right, you're saying it's objectively the case that what he ought to do is defame Darth Dawkins. Otherwise, you're a relativist about the good. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, but the reason why, to me, that doesn't line up is because what Daniel is doing is ought not to be done. And it is never the case that what Daniel is doing ought to be done. It is crystal clear that in all situations, it ought not be done. Now, being that it ought not be done, why is it? Why did it occur? Why did God permit that to occur? And that would be a different reason other than. So in other words, Daniel could have done what ought not be done. He could have done what ought to be done. So irrespective of whether ought not be done occurred, and what ought to be done occurred, in both instances, what did occur ought to occur. And so whether something ought to be done or ought not be done is not determinative on whether it ought to occur, because God permitted both cases to occur, and it does not define whether it ought to occur or not.
I don't think you're tracking. So let me put it this way. We agree that the event in question, the event which is an object of deliberation, right, for each agent is the same, right? God deliberates on whether Daniel ought to defame Darth Dawkins.
Right, but it's already decided. He ought not.
Yeah, well, once God makes the decision that, no, not that it ought not. He thinks it's in all things considered a good for that event to occur, right? So the event in question is Daniel defames Darth Dawkins, right?
Okay.
So God considers, is that something that ought to occur or ought it not to
right.
occur?
Right, and let me give you...
He concludes...
yeah. Let me give you another example.
He concludes that it ought to... Well, I think another example is going to confuse me.
No, it should clarify it, hopefully. So Daniel is person A, and he ought not do it. Now you have another person, let's just say Delano. He also ought not do it, right? But it's such the case that in Daniel's case, he didn't do what ought to be done. In Delano's case, he did do what ought to be done. And so in both cases, God permitted it or guided it in a sense that both occurred. And so once again, being that they both ought to occur, it is not the case that what Daniel did was good, pro toto good, and what Delano did is already good. And so what I'm saying is it does not affect whether it's good or evil. It's the act. It is not dependent upon God's permission whether the act is good or not. And so I guess you're trying to focus too much on the act of Daniel, and because God permitted it, it therefore is necessarily good. And I'm saying that's not the case.
Yeah, but I think we're getting off track here. So I'm saying, right, there's one event, right? The event is Daniel defaming Darth Dawkins, right? Now, God considers that event, right? And he concludes that that's something that is in all things considered good, and therefore it ought to happen, right? And he therefore causally determines that it occur, right? We agree on that so far.
Yeah.
Right. And we also agree that there's one standard of the good. There's one objective standard of the good, right? Which is given by God's desires or God's nature or something like that, right?
Yeah, but I think what you're taking away is there's two acts. There's Daniel's act and there's God's act.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about the event.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so the event is in all things considered good, right? Now, we also agree...
Oh, wait. No, I don't consider the event all things considered good. I would say the event is always evil.
Well, I don't understand that because I thought that we were agreeing that God concludes that it ought to happen.
Well, wait a minute.
That event ought to happen.
I think the event kind of makes it a little bit ambiguous. The action would be better. The event is what just occurred, right? And so the act by Daniel prior to even acting, right, would be.
Well, the event is an action, right?
Right.
The event is an action.
As in like real time or after the fact?
Well, the point is God considers, right, the event. Daniel defaming Darth Dawkins. That event is an action, right? Daniel defames Darth Dawkins. That's an action that Daniel undertakes or could undertake or will undertake, right? God considers, is that event something that ought to happen or not? And he concludes that it ought to happen, all things considered.
Well, it's actually, it ought not to happen. That's what I'm trying to say. He commands it not to happen.
I don't understand what it means to say it ought not to happen if he causally determines it to happen because he concludes that it not happening would be worse than it happening.
Yeah, I mean, this particular topic. I mean, I've literally maybe 10 hours is a exaggeration, but I've spent quite a bit of hours on this very fundamental topic with Floyd. Many hours with Daniel himself, the subject here, and now you. And I understand where you guys are coming from, but I don't think you guys know where. That's the funny part. I understand where all three of you guys are saying. I don't think you guys understand what I'm saying. That's the funny part.
Well, I'm not sure what to do at this point. Is Tom here?
You know the best way to understand sometimes with two people is like sit at a table and just be like draw stuff on paper, and that's the best way to understand sometimes.
I'd love to know what Tom thinks of this.
But yeah,
he wants to do drawings now. He thinks that's going to help. That's interesting.
Yeah, Tom.
I think that'll help.
You saw him sort of like, you saw him, resist every step of the way. And, then he sort of felt like he had to go along with it, But then suddenly, as he gets to the edge, the edge of the cliff, he suddenly pulls back.
Wait a minute, hold on. I must have made a mistake. I don't know how I got so close to this edge. I got to retrace. No.
Well, but he doesn't know where he went wrong with respect to the previous reasoning.
No,
he just knows he doesn't like where he ended up.
That's why it has to be drawn.
No, it's not that. No, it's obviously I know it's where you say.
So now that's funny that Paul Watson is trying to suggest that even on a compatibilist view, there should be a way to resist the logic.
No,
is that right?
But you're saying, so several times you would make a statement and John would say, yeah, but then you would say it again and he'd be like, no, wait. So yeah, just holding all this in your mind is not the way to do it. You should draw it out. John's right.
Yeah, but I'm just trying to understand. Do you think there was an error in my reasoning, Paul?
There's no error in your reasoning based upon your model, your beginning, tying in certain boxes in, lining it up here, and then the end result here, to where there is no X and Y, right? From the beginning, I've always said there's an X and Y. Just the way that you characterize it, it's just X and X only. The event, the occurrence, the action. That's how you characterize it. I don't view it that way, Jack.
Yeah, we can get to that, but I just want to make sure that Paul agrees that the logic is perfectly valid, right? Is that
no?
right,
I don't agree
Paul?
that the logic is valid. And look, you
so
don't.
where
want
was the
John to
error
be
in my
consistent.
reasoning, Paul?
Wait.
No, I actually do agree with your logic, Jack. The only thing is the starting
Yeah,
point.
but Paul doesn't agree. Paul
the
doesn't agree. So where was the error in my reasoning, Paul?
John, what you said, which is you said that it not ought to happen. You right, John?
No. I've always said everything that happens ought to happen.
Yeah, but what did you say about it not being all things considered bad? Is that what you said?
No, all things are considered is always good, but the action itself he ought not do, which is different. I make the distinction between ought not.
Yeah, Paul, I'm sure you agree with John, right?
I think he has a
Don't you
different
think that
model
all
altogether.
things that happen ought
No,
to
I
happen, John, Paul?
I think what human understanding throws a wrench into it all.
No, but you said there was an error in my reasoning. What was that?
No, I just said if John, if you said to John that he had agreed, and John said no, I did not agree to an earlier statement. So you ought to get to where he does agree. That he.
So you're not objecting to my reasoning.
No, I'm objecting to the fact that John had to correct himself and said, wait, no, I disagree. And so that should be noted.
So as far as you're concerned, there's nothing wrong with my reasoning,
You can't say to John, no, you can't change your mind.
So as far as you're concerned, there's nothing wrong with my reasoning then? Is that right?
No, I wasn't following it that closely. I was just following the fact that John and needs to be able to clarify. You need to allow him to clarify his views.
Well, if you weren't following that closely, how is it that you know that I didn't characterize his views correctly?
I know that John was wanting to clarify his
views.
I'm
not denying that he wants to clarify his views.
Well, so you should let him clarify his views, yeah.
Oh, well, that might be. But what I'm trying to understand is, if you weren't following closely, how did you know that I didn't characterize his views correctly?
I think it was more like consider what I'm talking about, and I just listened to what you're talking about.
So John should be able to clarify.
I think the starting point.
Yeah, but that's not an answer to my question, is it?
No, well, you're getting off the subject.
Well, I'm raising a question, which I'd be interested for you to answer, right? Which is, if you didn't follow it very closely, how do you know that I didn't characterize his views correctly?
Because he disagreed. He disagreed. He wanted to clarify.
There's an alternative hypothesis, though, for why he did that, right?
Well, you should assume people are arguing in good faith.
Oh yeah? Why should I assume that?
Oh, well, it's just a good rule of thumb you learned in kindergarten.
That's just repeating the claim, right?
Don't assume malevolence.
That's just repeating the claim, right? I'm asking why I should assume that.
I think it just leads to a better life if you assume good faith.
Leads to better in respect to what?
You should not assume malevolence.
Yeah,
You should assume
even
people
if
are
I have
arguing.
good
So let
reason
him
to think
clarify.
so.
So you think he was in bad faith wanting to clarify?
Absolutely.
Oh, well, that's.
You think that I'm mistaken to think that?
Look, if you're working through a problem together and trying to come to a conclusion together, if you're trying to win points, yeah, that's different. But if you're trying to come to a conclusion together or agree, it's not. You want your interlocutor to agree with all the points. It's just like a good sparring would.
Oh, I want
that.
to show. I want to show that his view is incoherent.
Then show it by making sure that he agrees with your statements, and then you can show that if you want. But you're not going to be showing it if he disagrees with your characterization.
Yeah, that might be right. What I'm contesting is any imputation on your part that I didn't characterize his views correctly.
Disagreed.
Oh, I grant you that he disagrees, right? But there's an alternative hypothesis as to why, right? There's an alternative hypothesis as to why.
Yeah, and so now
he
you're saying he's
disagreed.
lying or something.
Well, he's motivated.
Yeah.
He's motivated because he understood the conclusion was going to end up in a place where he ended up saying something which was clearly self-contradictory, right? And so that's why all of a sudden, after 2 hours or whatever it's been of very scrupulous clarification of all the steps in the argument, once he got to the brink of the precipice, all of a sudden, I've mischaracterized his view, right? That's my hypothesis, right? Now, I'm just trying to understand why it is that you are saying that my hypothesis is wrong.
If you want to win the argument, to me, you have to have his agreement about your characterizations of his statements.
Yeah, I've granted you that. That's fine.
Yeah, so
I can grant you all of that. That's not what I'm questioning.
That's my.
I'm asking you whether you're contesting that my hypothesis is correct.
I'm contesting that if you're arguing with him and he disagrees with, if you're not steel manning or if he disagrees with your characterization of his argument, to me as an outside observer, you didn't win. You didn't make any progress.
Yeah, but that's not what I asked you, is it? Did you not hear my question?
No, I don't.
You didn't hear it?
Did you not hear my statement?
Yeah, it wasn't an answer to my question. I asked you a question, and you didn't answer it. Did you hear my question?
No, I feel like you're not addressing my point. So.
Well, but your point wasn't an answer to my question. Prior to you making that point, I asked you a question.
Yeah, I don't care.
And you didn't answer it. Did you hear that question?
I don't care.
Oh, you don't care about my question?
No, I care about the fact that he didn't agree with your characterization.
Yeah, I understand that you care about that. That isn't what I asked you. I didn't ask you.
I don't care. You're not the boss of me.
Or not. Yeah, I didn't say I was the boss of you, right? I said I asked you a question.
I'm glad you asked me a question.
Yeah. Now, what's the answer to that question?
I don't have to give. I don't even know the question. I just know that you.
Oh, so you weren't even listening when I was speaking.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a little bit weird to me that you, for some reason, are very concerned with this idea of charitability to one's interlocutors, and yet when it comes to talking to me, right, you don't even listen to what I'm saying. Is that a way to be charitable?
I came in with the observation, and which I've stated several times.
Yeah, and that's not an answer to my question either.
Yeah, I came in with an observation.
Yeah.
Yeah, if he doesn't agree with your characterization, that is just bad faith.
Oh, yeah? How is it bad faith if I have good reasons to believe, right, that when he objects, he's not actually objecting?
Yeah, now you're throwing in deception and stuff, and that's just not.
Yeah.
It's sloppy. It's all real sloppy.
Wait, when you say it's sloppy, what does that mean? That it's a poor inference?
You're not making any progress. We're saying, oh, you're lying, and no, I'm not lying, and all that stuff. It's like,
So by sloppy, you mean that we're not making progress with respect to what aim?
You're not making progress. If he disagrees,
you seem to
with
your
characterization.
Seems like every time I ask you a question. Seems like every time I ask you a question, you dodge it.
Foul ball.
So what's that about? What is it about that you come into a discussion, right? You intervene in a discussion to make some observation, right? And when a challenge is posed to you, you dodge it, right? And then you say some more stuff, right? And a challenge is posed to you and you dodge it. And then you say some more stuff and a challenge is posed to you and you dodge it. And all the while, right, you're affirming some norm of charitability towards interlocutors, right? And yet you show none of that to your interlocutor.
I'm not.
So what's that about?
I'm not.
Oh, I'm not your interlocutor. So you weren't talking to me. You weren't talking to me when you made that observation.
No, I'm a critic.
You weren't talking to me when you made that observation. Oh, and now you're just not answering again. Yeah. So again, when we're trying to characterize what that claim is, right? Trying to get a clear understanding of what that claim is. And each time I ask you a question and to clarify that claim, you don't answer it. So how is it that we're supposed to understand that claim if you won't clarify it?
I'm already satisfied. I'm satisfied. I came in, I wondered why you did not take his claim seriously that he disagreed with your characterization. And you said something like you think he's lying or deceptive or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it's like, now I'm satisfied. I'm perfectly
satisfied. Okay, good. So you don't have any challenge to raise.
Yeah, I had the challenge.
To my hypothesis. I don't know why you're over talking me. You don't have any challenge to raise to my hypothesis that John is disagreeing because he doesn't like the outcome rather than because I mischaracterized his view, right? You don't have a challenge to that, do you?
Yeah, my challenge is you will not proceed. And so I'm satisfied.
Sorry. So when you're saying that you think my hypothesis is false, is that right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay, what's the evidence for that?
Because you gave up. You said you disagreed.
I haven't given up.
Yeah.
I don't know why you think I've given up.
You gave up, but you said that you now think he is just a liar or something. I don't know. You gave up.
Yeah, but how is that not consistent with my hypothesis? Right? You're saying that you, for what favors your hypothesis over my hypothesis. How is that happening not consistent with my hypothesis?
No, it's what that he lied.
That he's motivated.
No, that's a foul. That's a foul, dude.
So when you say it's a foul, what does that mean?
That means you have a not steel man. That means he disagrees with your characterization.
But I haven't denied that I am not steel man in his view.
He owns that.
Sorry.
And
stop yourself. Stop yourself.
Right.
I haven't claimed.
You characterize his claim.
Sorry, I asked you.
That's foul.
I don't know what your fucking problem is.
Yeah, Paul, please stop.
Yeah. So sorry, by foul you mean I didn't steel man his view, right? That's what you mean by foul?
Yeah, it means that you are not allowing him to clarify.
Not allowing him to clarify?
What?
So it doesn't mean that I didn't steel man his view.
Yeah, and that too.
Oh, so foul means two things. That I didn't allow him to clarify and I didn't steel man his view. But it's not a normative claim. It's not a normative claim, is that right?
Yeah. No.
It's not a normative claim. So there's nothing wrong with committing fouls. Is that the idea?
Yeah, there is as an out. Yes, there is.
There is. So it is a normative claim.
Look. When you hear a claim from somebody and restate it back to them and they disagree, then you're not making progress.
Making progress with respect to what aim?
So your aim's to coming to some sort of conclusion.
Wait, but I told you what my aim was. You didn't hear me when I said that? Did you hear me say what my aim was?
No, I'm not interested, dude.
Oh, you're not interested now.
No, I'm satisfied.
You're
I'm
not interested. So
arguing.
you're saying, oh, you're satisfied. You're satisfied with what?
I'm satisfied with my suspicion. I had a suspicion, and I tried to verify it. And
A suspicion. What was the suspicion in question?
That you're not arguing in good faith.
That I'm not arguing in good faith, meaning what?
All the stuff we already went over. Dude, you're boring me.
I'm asking you what it means to say that I'm not arguing in good faith. What does that mean?
You don't have the right to know.
I don't have the...
Jack, Paul loves to argue the meta.
No, I'm familiar.
So,
I know that he's
so
I know that
It's
Paul.
your garbage.
Look, I know. Believe me, I've known from the first day I encountered Paul that he's one of the most dishonest people on Clubhouse.
Doesn't hurt my feelings.
Which is why you dodge it. Shut your mouth.
Doesn't hurt my feelings.
Which is shut your mouth while I'm talking. Which is why he keeps dodging my questions. Right. Every time I ask him a question, he dodges. Right. And the irony is that he touts that he believes in norms of conversations where good faith is observed, right, as a regulative norm, right, where charitability is a regulative norm, right? But when he's talking to me, he doesn't even listen to what I'm saying, right? Mm-hmm. And when I point out that that's not a charitable thing to do, what does he do? He dishonestly dodges, right? So believe me, I know as soon as he opened his mouth the first time, right, and said, oh, we're co-creators, right, it was in the service of the dishonesty that is inveterate in him, right? So you don't have to actually tell me, although I appreciate it.
Doesn't hurt my feelings.
I appreciate, yeah. Nobody cares whether it hurts your feelings or not.
I don't care that nobody cares.
Yeah. So, are you interested in defending your position or not? Because if not, just fuck off.
I'm very satisfied.
Yeah. You keep saying that. You think we didn't hear you the first time?
Don't care, dude.
Yeah. Are you going to defend your position or not?
No.
Yeah, so fuck off.
I'm satisfied. I defended it.
Yeah. We have some questions about what you're saying. Are you going to answer those questions or not?
No. Sorry you're triggered.
You're not going to answer, right? Yeah, I'm triggered. You know why I'm triggered? Because you're a dishonest piece of garbage.
Dude, it doesn't hurt my feelings.
Yeah, I didn't say it hurt your feelings. Did you get the idea that I was saying that because it hurt your feelings? Because I thought it would hurt your feelings?
This is not an argument. It's boring.
Do you think that I think that my aim is to entertain you? Do you think that I care whether you're bored or not? I'm just trying to understand, what's your motive here? Right? You keep saying stuff like it doesn't hurt my feelings, you're boring me. Right? Do you think that I care about those things? Right? I was interested in you saying that I wasn't operating in good faith, right? And I asked you with respect to what aim, right? And it didn't sound like the aim that you were proposing was the aim that I had, right? When I asked you if you heard me, when I said what my aim was, you wouldn't answer.
I'm not listening to you that carefully, actually.
Yeah.
Well, you're an inveterate laughingstock.
Yeah, but if you're not listening that carefully, right, why are you shooting your mouth off about what's going on in the discussion if you're not even listening that carefully? Like, why would we be interested in hearing what some dumbass who isn't even... Shut your mouth while I'm talking. Why would we be interested in hearing what some dumbass, right, who isn't even listening carefully has to say about the conversation? Right? Like, why would we be interested in your opinion at all if you're not even fucking listening?
I don't know, but you
Right.
started talking about it a lot.
Well, I have a hypothesis as to why, right? Which is that you're basically just a fucking thug, right? That's my hypothesis. You're a fucking thug, right? And you didn't like where I was going. You didn't like the fact that I was showing that one of your fellow Christian brothers' worldviews is fucking incoherent, just like yours, right? You didn't like that that's where it was going, right? And like a thug, you decided to throw up some kind of roadblock, right? Shoot your mouth off about some garbage, right? To try to make me look bad, right? Problem is that I'm not some fucking clown, right? Who's not going to be able to fight back and challenge you on what you had to say, right? And you realized pretty quickly, right, that if you were to engage, you were going to lose, right? So you started your inveterate game of dodging, right?
Go on.
Yeah, that's all there is to it. That's my hypothesis as to why somebody who's not even listening carefully, right, decides to shoot his mouth off about some discussion that he's not listening carefully to. Because you're a fucking thug, right? So yeah, so I'm telling you again, right? Fuck off if you're not going to engage.
You sound kind of violent and unhinged.
Yeah, thanks. That's more thuggery, right? So I'll say it again. If you're not going to engage, just fuck off. Nobody wants to hear what some dumbass like you says if you're not even listening and you can't even bother to defend or clarify what you're saying. We don't give a fuck.
Dude, I'm not talking. You're talking like 99% of all the talk is you.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. What's your defend your claim then, Paul?
I defended it to myself. I'm fully satisfied.
To yourself?
I did. He did not. I was suspicious.
What?
I
You
asked
should
a
have heard the
question.
argument
I
he
got my
gave himself. It
answer.
was
Paul,
I
impressive.
was
It was
suspicious.
impressive.
I got my question answered.
I don't think he
I'm
grasped
fully
the argument
satisfied.
he gave
you're an
himself.
inveterate friction burn.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
So, Paul, was there anything else? Do you want to
Dude, I haven't been
make
talking.
an argument?
I haven't been saying anything.
No, but I'm asking you. I just asked you. Is there anything else?
No, I
you
got
want to
my
make an
question
argument?
answered fully. It was good.
So we're done here. You don't want to talk to him anymore. Is that
not
right?
been saying anything.
Will you just answer
We
the
know
question?
that. We're aware of that.
Did you look? Do you want to continue and talk? Do you have something else to talk about, or should I just send you down? That was my question.
I told like 8 times.
It's a yes or no.
I got my question answered.
No, but imagine the cowardice.
Okay, bye.
That you would come up here.
You can't even answer.
What a fucking
do you have
popinjay.
anything else to say? You couldn't even answer that yes or no. It's weird.
Wait, Detroit, would you like to pick up with John Lee?
Not really.
No. Who would?
I find a lot of Calvinists, especially moderate and lower Calvinists, to be very consistent. They'll flip flop between theistic determinism and libertarian free will. They'll say, God foreordains.
Well, no, he doesn't subscribe to libertarian free will except for God. Like he has this very strange view where he thinks that God is libertarian free to choose either not to create or to choose to create this world and no other world. Do you know about this, Detroit?
No, I haven't heard that.
Yeah, so John Lee thinks God has libertarian free will with to create or not.
Are you're cutting out on me? Is that just me?
Sorry, let me turn on my Wi-Fi. Hold on a second.
Yeah, John Lee's view is that
God wait, are you talking about the thing? Or he can choose either to not create or to create, but if he creates, it's only this world.
Yes, there's only one possible created. Is this?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
But somehow God had the libertarian free will to create this.
Given that God Sorry.